important day from another perspective. It is 59 years since Kausalya was murdered in Lenora. And Kausalya, it is a very significant, or we can say what a coincidence it was, that Dr. Jagan, when Kausalya had died, he was there, and I wanted to share with you some excerpts of what he said at Kausalya funeral. And how were we to know that so many years later on that Comrade Cheddi himself died on the same day? That is a very significant coincidence. So we're happy to have you. I know today is a day on the eve of Pagwa. Halka is going to be burned tonight. And I know a lot of you, especially our Hindu brothers and sisters, would like to be at home, to be participating in this event, and also to make all the sweetmeats and all the preparation for tomorrow. But you have chosen to be with us today, and we're appreciative of this initiative and the effort that you have made to be with us today. So once again, a warm welcome on behalf of the Cheddi Jagan Research Center. As I said before, I will read something to you later on, but for today's proceeding, we have 3 persons who will be making presentations. We are hoping that our activity can finish by 6:30. I'm putting that timeline so that we allow you to go back to your homes in a very timely way. We hope that it will finish by that time. So the first speaker today is Comrade Sheila Doraisamy. She's the General Secretary of the Women's Progressive Organization. She's also a Member of Parliament. Comrade Sheila has grown up with us in the WPO. She will always say when she was a little girl, she will come to Freedom House to see these, as she will call them, these not older women, but women who are, how I should say, her mentors. So she would come and we will guide her and we're there for her. So we're happy that she has grown to be the kind of woman that she is today, not afraid to speak her mind and very bold. And that is a kind of women that we have nurtured in the WPO. Women who are not docile, but who can stand up and represent their organization and their party and themselves. So Sheila, with pleasure, I ask that you take the microphone, please.
Comrade Intra did not put this thing that little Sheila used to do. I used to come and look at these short women that had the stature of Mount Roraima. That is how I used to see them, so tall and huge, and they had this majestic kind of personality who was ready to speak out and ready to do things for Guyanese people. And I came from this very poor family. People who didn't had much education. They worked in the cane fields, and my father was a carpenter. And I used to say, can I grow up to be a little bit like them? I'm proud to say, with their nurturing and with their guidance, I am indeed a little bit like them. Can I fit in their shoes? Absolutely not. You're prejudiced. So, I want to share some thoughts on some of the things about Comrade Cheddi that I remembered as a person. So, I have this privilege on behalf of the women's section of the People's Progressive Party, that is the Women's Progressive Organization, that was established in 1953 on the 27th of May. But one that many people do not know, that there was another organization that was established on the 9th of July 1946, and it was called the Political and Economic Organization for Women. And that organization, though centrally located, did a lot of work with the guidance of Comrade Cheddi and Comrade Janet. It couldn't withstand the trials and tribulations of the time because it was not spread into the countryside. Hence, that organization took a low key, and then some of those very leaders formed the Women's Progressive Organization that has, up to today, what we would call its roots in communities across Guyana. Cheddi Jagan, who is he? Is he just a man that formed a party? Is he just the husband of Janet Jagan? Is he just the father of Nadira and Joey? Or is he just the siblings of 9 other brothers and sisters? For me, he is all of those things, but for me, he is an institution. He's like a university that you have to attend if you were born in that era. And I'm thankful that I was born in the era, even though at the end, a latter end, when I came into the organization, to have met this towering gentleman. And gentleman, that was he, indeed so. He was a leader of a particular kind that I am still looking in the midst of my the circles, the groupings that I can look at one and say, this is Cheddi Jagan like. He was a revolutionary. He could inspire an unmotivated person to go and do things. He just opened his mouth and speak to them. He was our father, our political father. He nurtured a section of this nation to understand their rights and their freedom. And I think that is what caused many of those who were nurtured in that era to be standing still today. Standing, holding on, holding this party, fetching it, carrying it on our shoulders, and trying to prepare the next generation of people who can take that and walk with it so that we can throw back and have some, personal time with probably our children, and like Commandant she has her grandson. He taught us to recognize our worth. Colonialism had beaten the backbone out of people, battered them psychologically, that they did not even know how to recognize that they had worth. He nurtured the people then to understand their roles and responsibilities. And like Comrade he once said, the PPP is in our DNA. The only way it can get out of us is when we die. Because we have walked the walk and we have talked the talk. And we know what it is. We are the voices of the voiceless, and we are the strength of the weak. That's what Cheddi Jagan was, and that is what he taught some of us to be. That era in the 50s, coming right down to 1992, saw a grouping of people who were selfless. They had no ambition to have anything because they knew only one thing, and that is how to talk to people and get them to come on board so that we can fight the fight for the restoration of democracy in Guyana. Cheddi Jagan was a man who was such a person, who was capable of winning hearts of almost anyone. I've met people who used to tell me I didn't know how to say no to Comrade Cheddi, even though when I didn't want to do it. I didn't even want to say no to him when sometimes I don't think he was totally correct. And that's the magnitude of this gentleman. Once you met him, you're totally gone. You're a goner. You lost this heart to this man. You fall in love with him. And this is not a love that you fall in love with a boy and you like him and you want to marry him and so on. This is pure love. Love that you just want to do something to help this situation. Not love that you want something, but you always want to know you would like to walk in his shadows at all times. I grew up seeing him on photographs hanging on the walls in our house. And I saw 3 photographs there. One of them was when he was standing in the Indian Parliament. The other one was him, Comrade Janet, and Forbes Burnham. And the other one was a few of them with Forbes Burnham and Comrade Janet and Comrade Cheddi again. And every time I saw that photograph, well, the first time I got sense enough to see the photograph, I asked my father who that was. And then after that, I started shooting daggers at Burnham, and I had this hankering, I wanted to meet Comrade Cheddi. And then I was like, why you have photograph with him there? Right? Because of course the tales of the time was coming to fore in my mind. This little girl was becoming a teenager, and she was grasping and understanding things. And like every right-minded Guyanese, it's like you had this solemn prayer, I want this man to disappear. Because believing that when he disappeared, Guyana would have become better. Well, we know what happened when he died in 1985. We still had many years more, 7 more years we had to struggle before we could have had democracy restored. The first time I saw Comrade Cheddi, I went as an observer to WPO Congress in 1980 at LBI Primary School, but I saw him from a distance. He was standing on the stage and I was in the audience. And in person, you saw the photograph on the wall and you see this beautiful smile. But the funny thing is that when you see him in person, his smile was much more captivating. Much, much more captivating. And of course, after 1980, I started to come to Freedom House a little bit later. And then that is when, around that time, I met Comrade Indra. And so I used to, from time to time, I used to come here. And then, then I met him a little closer. I was sent to Accra Bay College, and this was housed in Gau's building on Regent Street. And Comrade Cheddi came there to teach us party history. And guess what? I had the first privilege, or the privilege for the first time, of having lunch with Comrade Cheddi. Man, all of us who were sitting around with Comrade Cheddi, we were all like, don't know what to say at the table. And we were all shy, and we were all looking at him from under our eyes. Because we didn't know if we could have looked at him straight. But this was the first time that's the first impression I had of him. But he was such a wonderful person that he started to make conversations and engage us. And we were like, at that time, I was probably about 16 or so. And then, as I would call it, that was one of my most cherished moments. And then, Comrade Cheddi, you see, I don't want to go into the history of how he formed the party and how the party was split and how he had to struggle to get back into government and all that, because I have stalwarts in the party to do that. But one of the things we don't normally talk about is this human being. And I remember the second time I came to Freedom House, I came to tell him a story about hearing about how they go in and burn down the sugarcane fields. And because when they do that, the PPP used to get blamed for it. So they used to do these things to get PPP to be blamed for things that are happening. And mind you, that story hasn't changed so many decades later. Things happen, PPP still get blamed. So I came to meet with him at Freedom House, and I said to Comrade Gale, can I meet with Comrade Cheddi for about 5 minutes? I really, really need to speak to him. And I'll tell you the impression that I have, and I'm sure other comrades have the same impression. I am sitting there in his office on a settee. He didn't go and sit opposite me. He came and he sat in the same settee that could hold 2 persons, and he sat next to the settee. And all he said to me is that, Sheila, I have a meeting to go to in about 10 minutes. So I will talk to you for 5 of those. And I said to him, I don't need all the 5, I just bring a message for you. But you know what happened? He sat there like a sideway to me, and he turned to face me. And you know what? He made me feel like I'm the most important person in the world in his presence. That what I had to say to him, whether truth or not, was of utmost importance at that present moment. Who does that for us? Such a busy person, has so many things to do, and I am telling him a story, and he is making me feel, this little child, it's making me feel that you're not only a small little comrade in the PYO and the WPO, but what you bring here is so important. Can you understand the magnitude of that feeling, how honorable you feel to be in his presence? Sorry, how honored you feel to be in his presence. And can you imagine, that is why, and I see Comrade Rajendra here, and some other comrades from that era, that is how he made us feel. When you go out to do political work, sometimes you don't want to go. But Comrade Cheddi would stand up in front of you, and guess what? The Mirror newspaper could hardly be read because we were not getting to bring in a press into the country to print the Mirror, so some of the writings were not even seen. But he would say to you, you have to go sell the Mirror, you have to go sell the Grammar, and we are all over the country selling these papers. But when he finished speaking to you, you like, what do you call the Rumpelstiltskin, that guy who spun the straw and made gold? That is how he makes you feel. So by the time you go sell the newspaper, you have your quota. You coming back, I think was 25 cents. Was about 25 cents for this newspaper. You coming back without any newspaper and all sold out. And this is how we learn how to travel different parts of Guyana, and we start learning about people. And the beautiful people who love Comrade Cheddi so much, they would run on the road, grab your hand, take you into the yard, and say, you're tired, the sun has come, drink some water. Or they can come say, you're hungry, it's lunchtime, come eat some food. And many times when we go out in the countryside, we don't walk with food and water because we get it from the people. And one of the things that I always say to myself is that I could have never been who I am today. And that is why I always carry this feeling of gratitude. Gratitude to the PPP for creating the PYO and the WPO, because the PYO was the first organization that was open to me, and then the WPO I stayed in all my life. And through these organizations, guess what? I became a member of the PPP family. And Comrade Indra know that when I was growing up, I was a girl child that was breaking all the chains. And it was turmoil. Because how dare you go out and come in at 8, 9, 10 in the night? And you had all these issues. But you know what? I found brothers. I found sisters. I found grandparents. I never seen mine, but yet I found grandparents. I found little sisters and little brothers. And this family that Cheddi Jagan created, whether he created it in his mind or not, I look at many of the men in the party today from that era and I still say Baya. It means brother. And I look at the sisters, I can go and put my head on their shoulders at any time and I can cry my story. And that is what, outside there, we are fighting to realize Cheddi Jagan's legacy and put his words into practice and to build this one Guyana that Comrade Cheddi spoke about, unity, a long, long time ago. But I don't want to speak about that. I want to say to you that when we got into power in '92, PNC left behind a huge foreign debt, an empty treasury, an infrastructure that was collapsing, a political system that was corrupt, and a public service system that was controlled by PNC parasites. After the 28 years, Guyana is moving ahead. Cheddi Jagan life, work, and legacy will live on long after we are gone. And it will put Guyana in a place on this world map as it has we begin to see, where all will look towards us for leadership and guidance.
So I will call another person to share some personal stories, and this is Lakshmi Lal. She's the wife of our former High Commissioner from Guyana to London. All stalwarts of this party. I remember him, I don't know, and Rohi and all of Hari and everybody. We'll remember him as a very outstanding comrade who he's always there for us, always making sure that our needs are looked after. and always welcome us into his home and all of that. And Lakshmi has been that spouse who have always supported him. So Lakshmi, please share with us, because I know Cheddi has visited your house, has stayed at your house and all of that.
It is both an honor and a privilege to be asked to say a few words in the celebration of the life of His Excellency, the late President Cheddi Jagan, affectionately known to many of us as Comrade Cheddi. I just want to give a very short outline of my personal time and contact with him as the person I knew, because I think everybody knew who Comrade Cheddi was and what he lived for, what he aspired for. So it's going to be a little personal. The very first time I had the privilege of meeting Comrade Cheddi, I was a young teenager at the age of 15 when my father took me to his dentistry to extract a tooth. But I think my father could have taken me locally because I'm from the East Bank, but he wanted to get me there because it was an opportunity for him to have a chat with Comrade Cheddi about the sugar workers, because my father was a sugar worker. And they had a long exchange of conversation, and Comrade Cheddi was asking all kinds of questions. And my dad, you know, he idolized Comrade Cheddi, as many people did. Then again, in London, in 1972, again, I kind of was able to meet Comrade Cheddi, and from then on it was very close contact whenever he travelled to and from London. Through the PBP UK branch, where I have had the opportunity to interact with him over the years. Before he became president in 1992, his base in London was always our home. Whenever he was in London or passing through, he would always stay with us. What I admired about Comrade Cheddi was not only his politics and his unshakable commitment to Guyana, but certain cherished values he lived by. And one of those values was humility, exceptional humility coming from him. He was an incredible, humble person. On his visits to London during those difficult years of the oppression we face in Guyana, he worked tirelessly, as many of you know, internationally. He would visit London, he would campaign, you know, for meetings with MPs in the Houses of Parliament, organizations, meeting influential individuals to highlight Guyana's fight for the restoration of democracy. I remember he would be happy to accompany me to my local street market in Walthamstow, Chingford, where I live. And he would be delighted looking at all the stalls and asking questions about items of fruit or veg on display and the prices. So he would try, and I'll try to convert, you know, the money back into like Guyanese dollars, how much things would be. He had that natural gift, the common touch that won the hearts of the working people. I know one of his cherished dreams was national unity, where all Guyanese can work and live in peace and harmony. And I'm so happy to see the PPP Civic Party and the government of Guyana working so hard and committed to bringing all the people together through the One Guyana initiative. I would also like to thank Comrade Intra for inviting me to accompany her to Berbice, where we visited the house in which Comrade Cheddi spent his formative years growing up as a young man. And also we did a visit to Babu Jan. It was indeed a very touching and emotional visit for me, because when he died, I could not come. I wasn't able to come, and that saddened me greatly. Because I knew the relationship and who he was. You know, he was a father to everyone. Finally, I just want to share some personal thoughts with you. I remember just before the 5th of October 1992 general elections, Comrade Cheddi was in London. He was leaving our home for the airport. I remember hugging him and saying, as I hugged him, I said, Comrade Cheddi, the next time we meet, I will be addressing you as Your Excellency, Mr. President. And he just looked at me and he just smiled graciously. Not a word from me, he just looked at me, and I know he was tired because it was a lot of campaign of meetings with people, because the elections were soon, like about not very long after we had the elections, weeks really. So sure enough, the next time I met him, he was of course the president. Then on another occasion, after becoming president, he visited London. And of course, with bodyguards, etc., provided by the UK government. It was his first overseas trip as president after our long history of 28 years of dictatorship. But Comrade Cheddi, being Comrade Cheddi, after his meeting in the car, and he went back in the car and he said to Lal, "We're going to your house now, right?" Because he was tired. Lal said, "Comrade Cheddi, you have a huge suite at the hotel provided by the UK government with bodyguards, etc. That's where I'm taking you." He said, "Oh." Such was his humility, no grandeur about him, a true example to mankind. As we celebrate his life, let us never forget to honor his legacy with service to improve the lives of others. I shall always remember Comrade Cheddi for an example he set that allowed us, those who knew him and worked with him, to live a more tolerant and humane life. He has served humanity well. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts of the experience of a truly incredible human being.
Well, now from Lakshmi to Ian. Ian is the nephew of Dr. Jagan, and he will also be sharing his thoughts.
The traits I really believe from Uncle Cheddi is his love for others and his resilience. I must say the resilience, his fight for what he believed in, how he went about things, rallying the nation, the things that and how strongly he stood for what he believed in are some of the traits that I look to and I like to implement or try my best to put forward as an individual also. Wherever Uncle Cheddi is today, I must say I'm pretty sure he is very excited, he's very happy that his legacy is being continued, and he is very proud, I'm sure, at the path or in the path at which Guyana is taking. Thank you everyone for being here today.
I just want to say a few words about the Cheddi Jagan Research Center. That is, the center was created after his death by Comrade Janet, and a board was established, and after she died, we continue with the work of the center. We're trying to build it and improve it continuously. It's an old building, but what I'm happy to say that we're always having guests coming here. At this present time, we have a lot of school children who will come to visit the center. So we would like to extend an invitation to all of you who have never had the opportunity to go upstairs. This is our conference area, but we have the two exhibition halls, the second floor and the third floor. So we invite you whenever you have the time, not today, but if you have the time, we would be happy to let you go there. But we want to extend an invitation when your relatives come from overseas, you have friends come, it is some way that you will want to bring them to see. Because this place is a very historic place in the sense that Dr. Jagan, when he was premier from 1957 to 64, lived here. And this is where all the persecution and everything that had happened to him and his family in the same place here. But you know what? As someone of you have said, he was a resilient guy, never afraid. He braved it all. And we know that in the end, he was successful in what he set out to do. So, and we have a board. Comrade Hyder Ali is the chairperson of the board and the administrator of this place. And we have 3 staff that are here, very dedicated staff and committed, who try their very best to make sure that the legacy of Dr. Jagan and Mrs. Jagan lives on as a result of what they do. So we thank them as well. And now I want to share with you a statement that was made, or some remarks that were made by Dr. Jagan at Kausilia. Remember, I started out by saying that today also is the 59th death anniversary of Kausilia, who was murdered in Lenora. And there were a number of party leaders. Cheddi was the premier, and a number of people were there. And he, in his capacity as leader and founder of the PPP, as well as his ministers, legislators, and everybody, they were there. The PPP was in government then, as you know. And Dr. Jagan described the day as a tragic one and added, the history of British Guyana is the history of sugar. And the history of sugar is the history of blood, sacrifice, and suffering. He said from the days of slavery to the days of indentureship and of free labor, the story was the same. He referred to the killing of the 5 sugar workers in Enmore in 1948 and noted that the incident had sharpened the struggle of the workers. The premier said the struggle of the Enmore workers forced the sugar bosses to break down the lodges. And he added, but as I walked around the estate today, I still see some lodges existing. Let us hope that Kausilia's supreme sacrifice will remove those lodges and exploitation in the country. Dr. Jagan said the sugar bosses would never get off the backs of the workers until they got rid of the colonial masters. He said they did not want to give freedom because they wanted to continue to rob and exploit the people. He said the country was on the threshold of freedom and called upon the gathering to pledge to make sacrifices so that tractors, lorries, and cars will not be driven willfully. I am one of you. It is just fortunate that I am premier. I pledge today that I and the other leaders of the party are fully with you in this struggle. End of quote. And now I would like to extend an invitation to a young man, Nikhil Sankar. Nikhil is from the West Bank. From where? Prashad Nagar. Okay, and he has written a poem specially designed for today. Nikhil, I would like to invite you to the poem.
When I was approached to write something for today, I snapped up the opportunity because only a few years ago, I learned about the history of this country and about Comrade Cheddi. And one cannot help but be captivated by this remarkable story of imagine one little boy coming from the plantation all the way to the halls of the United Nations talking about his new global order. That is a life that I think sometimes can only exist out of legend. But I write these pieces because I feel that in Guyana we need to immortalize people, places, and events as they happen. I don't think we really document our history very well. And because of that, there poses a risk. There poses a great risk because I can assure you, the vipers of yesteryear still walk amongst us in our society. They still do. And because of the lack of proper documentation of our history, they will prey upon that. They will use it to advance their opportunistic gains. We've seen them spinning events like the election. We've seen them spinning events as early as the crime wave. We've seen them distort even who killed Walter Rodney. So I think all of us in this room who stand upon the principles of truth, of freedom, I think it may sound like a burden, but it's on us to stand up and confront that narrative. We must make sure that the narratives of truth are heard. We must. Because what will happen? They will prey upon tomorrow's fruit, and they will only poison future generations yet to come. So but I know we've been through so much as a country, so I don't think that it will be too much of us, but I think once we are here, Once we're here and once we stand up, we must make sure that the truth must never die. So I've written this piece to Comrade Cheddi today. It's called Sunset. Not a pin could be heard amidst the silence as the raven made its final call from within those halls of Walter Reed, delivering the inevitable message. The long journey had come to an end, marking the sunset of a golden era. Our father, the great liberator, Comrade Cheddi, was no more. Cheddi lives in you, and in me, in all of our words, our thoughts, and our deeds, as we continue to stand for freedom, once forbidden, for truth, justice, and democracy, all virtues he extolled while he attains immortality, as we carry on the struggle, his spirit coursing through our very veins. From digging drains in the Creole gangs to dental school in the USA, holding the hand of his better half, their journey ordained by blood. Of Rambaran, Lalabaji, Suraj Bali, and Hari, there he made the vow, that silent pledge, standing tall from sunrise to sunset, this young boy from the estate, son of truck driver and little Baichoni, who spawned a revolution, now one with divinity. Against jail cells, riots, and puppet strings, he risked it all for us, our Papa Cheddi. His journey, defining a lifetime. His struggle, birthing a generation. Now our eternal guide, while he looks down proud amongst the cosmos. Everything will be all right. Walk on, Cheddi. Walk on, for your work here is done.
And now I want to, on your behalf, extend our warm welcome to our president. He's a very hard-working, humble, simple, caring, dynamic, always on the go president.
President gave a speech. I listened to the entire speech, but there was one section of the speech that attracted my attention. Not that the entire speech didn't attract my attention, but there was one section that did. And I'd like to quote that section of the speech made by the president, which is very appropriate for this occasion. And this is what the president said. There is no greater honor we can pay to the legend that came from Berbice, the father of the nation, a man who sacrificed all his life for the people of this country. Wherever his soul resides, he would be a happy man in this month of March. End of quote. I consider this to be a very profound statement. And why do I say this? I say this because in this excerpt from the speech, he mentions father of the nation. I reflected on those few words of the president. And it reminded me of a statement that was made by an individual who at the time was the leader of the opposition, but who has become so discredited after the 2020 elections that very few people pay much attention to what he has to say. And this is what he said in July of 2012. He was delivering a lecture at the then National Assembly Governance and Democracy Lecture Series. which incidentally the PPPC MPs did not attend. I think Irfan would remember that we decided that we would not participate in this so-called lecture series. And this is what he said at the time. There is no father of the nation. There is no mother of the nation. I think we have to unlearn this myth. I refer to this because in light of the statement or that excerpt of President Ali's speech, reminding us that there is a father of this nation. So it is that previous president that has to learn from those of us who continue to believe and to uphold this legacy of President Jagan that the president currently now sitting at the office of the president and the State House reminds us about. So it appears as though that former president has not learned anything. We continue to teach those who are unlearned about the legacy of President Jagan that he is indeed the father of this nation. And we must continue to say that. We must continue to say that. Because, as the young, he said he's not a poet, maybe he's a poet by compulsion and not by profession. He said that this is something that we must continue talking about. And incidentally, the individual, you notice I'm not mentioning names because I don't think those names are qualitative enough to mention here. Incidentally, the individual who now sits in the seat of the leader of the opposition contradicted the former president by saying that his statement was strange and it was intellectually flawed. I hope I'm not being too mysterious in what I'm saying, but I think those of you who follow closely the politics of this country will know the origins and the who is saying something. Having dispensed with that, I need to get it off my chest. A lot has been said about former President Cheddi Jagan when he was opposition leader, when he was president of this country, when he died, while he lived. A lot has been written and a lot has been said about him. I don't know what new could be said. Maybe there is something that could be said. But what we do know is that a lot has been written and a lot has been said about him. Now, there are just two things I'd like to mention about the politics and the skills of Dr. Jagan as a negotiator. That's where I would like to put my emphasis. We had elections in this country in 1973, in July of 1973. And those of you who would recall, in the course of those elections, 2 comrades were shot and killed on the quarantine. When the military, the then military, intervened and seized the ballot boxes, took them to Camp Ayangana, changed the votes inside, and then began to count them in favor of the then PNC. Those elections were described as fairy tale elections because nobody believed in it. Nobody believed in it. 2 years after those elections, after the PPP had launched what is called a civil disobedience campaign, Dr. Jagan launched that campaign in the country after what had happened. 2 years after those elections in 1975, the PPP declared itself in favor of what is called critical support. Critical support meaning because at that time, the then administration, the then Bonham administration, had begun to carry out some progressive foreign policies and domestic policies such as naturalization, etc. Now, just imagine after 2 years after these elections, when persons were killed, jailed, etc., the PPP decided to launch what is called critical support for the government at the time. But having done so, the PPP came in for a lot of criticism. Jagan was severely criticized for launching critical support, for declaring critical support, because it was seen by some as a sellout for the Indian people in this country. It was seen as a sellout for the supporters of the PPP. Why declare critical support for a government that has just stolen elections, that has just killed your supporters, that has just jailed your supporters, and now you, Jagan, is declaring what is called critical support for the then government? There's a lot to be spoken about in relation to that period, which time does not permit here. But the fact of the matter is, I want you to imagine a situation like that 2 years after the 73 elections of the type that I just described, where Jagan decided to encourage the party to declare what is called critical support for the then government. He held a public lecture at Freedom House to talk about this matter. The hall was packed. And in that crowd, there was a group of individuals, most of them lawyers. I don't mean any disrespect for lawyers or the profession. Most of them lawyers who stood up and challenged Dr. Jagan for declaring critical support. And so there was a discussion. Interestingly enough, a couple days after, Dr. Jagan invited these individuals to his home at Bel Air. The few that stood up and criticized him and challenged him, he invited them to his home in Bel Air to sit down and talk about this issue. Why are you claiming that I am a sellout for my supporters by declaring critical support? I don't want to go too much into the details, but what I can say is that at the end of the discussion, which took a long time, I felt, I don't believe that I agree, I don't agree with me when I say this, but I felt because I was there that he had convinced those individuals to support what he had declared in favor of. And why do I say I believe that they were convinced? Because when they were leaving the home, those of you who know that house, walking towards the gate, they were talking among themselves about how convincing Dr. Jagan was on this issue. And in addition to that, why I became convinced that they were convinced that the policy of critical support was a correct one was because there was no longer any debate in the public. They never said anything afterwards in the newspapers or the radio. And that was that. So the point I'd like to emphasize here is here was a man who recognized the dangers that were emerging in the country in the aftermath of the elections, where the military was playing a big role now in the country. People being killed, supporters of the PPP being killed. and so forth. And just 2 years after, Dr. Jagan recognized the need for critical support. And also the need to talk to people who were not convinced that his policy was correct, that he was a seller. The last example I'd like to give of the what I was called the skillful and tenacious approach of Jagan is the following. Just on the eve of the 1992 elections, there was a big debate in this country about who should be the presidential candidate to lead the country, because everybody knew, the whole country knew there was going to be a change. There was no doubt in Guyana that the PNC was finished. And everyone in this country, I would say without fear of contradiction, knew that a change was coming. There was even a greater view that the PPP would have been the victor in those elections, as it has been in our elections up to the most recent one with Irfan Ali. But the question was, who would be the presidential candidate? Not of the PPP, of the country. Of the country at the time. Because the PPP was clear about who should be its presidential candidate. And as Bar Jagdeo said in his speech at Palmyra, that every single move the PPP makes, whether it has to do with development, whether it has to do with new ideas or whatever, it's a struggle. They get it through. It's always a fight down. By persons who he described as naysayers, who don't want to see progress made in this country. So a group of people came forward and said, Dr. Jagan, you should not be the presidential candidate. That's what they told us barefacedly, what's called barefacedly, that Dr. Jagan should not be the presidential candidate. So we asked why. They said, well, Dr. Jagan, you're East Indian. Race. You're East Indian. That's number one. Number two, the businessmen would not support you because you're anti-business. Number three, black people wouldn't support you because you don't like black people. The military and the police would not support you because of the position that you have said over and over again, attacking the police and the army. And more than that, ideologically, you're not the best man to be the president of this country. All of that we had to listen to. And so Dr. Jagan said, okay, you don't want an Indian, you don't want someone who's anti-business, you don't want someone who you're not satisfied with ideologically. Well, we have another candidate to put to you. They said, well, who? He said, Dr. Luncheon. Yeah, no. So we said, why? He said he's black, but he's red. Luncheon is black, but he's red. Meaning he's a communist. And that defeated their entire argument and their entire castle which they had built on sand. But when we took that to the public, and when Dr. Jagan took that to the public and he took that to the private sector people, he met a lot of private sector people. When he took that to religious leaders, when he took that to a number of outstanding individuals in the country, they agreed unanimously that Dr. Cheddi Jagan should be the presidential candidate taking the country to elections. So when the party went to the elections, before I should say, the party had another discussion. Because in light of all these arguments that we raised, a question arose about the image of the party. The image of the party. Because Dr. Jagan was not only concerned about his supporters supporting him at the elections, he was also concerned about those who did not support or were not supporting him to come on board. And those of you who have lived through that experience, and those of you who see what's going on now, let's leave that to Irfan Ali to talk about. President Ali. How to change the image of the PPP. Presentation to the electorate. A discussion, Jagan initiated an internal discussion in the party. So when people come up with these foolish ideas that Dr. Jagan was not a thinker, he was not an innovator, to come up with these ideas, they don't know what they're talking about. But to cut a long story short, he said, let us create what is called the civic component and bring that to the People's Progressive Party to go to the elections as the PPP civic. Of course, there were some people who disagreed with that. Some people wanted to change the name of the PPP. Some people wanted to change the name of the PPP into something which the electorate would have a problem with, because if you change the name of the PPP, then you got to change the symbol of the cup, and you got to change so many things. It will be a big change. Cheddi Jagan, in the middle of the debate, stood up and said, look, we don't need to change all these things, because if you send a child to a grocery store, we didn't have too many supermarkets in those days. If you send a child to a grocery store to buy toothpaste, the only toothpaste they look for is Colgate. You might have 50 different types of toothpastes on the supermarket, but then you send somebody to buy toothpaste, all toothpaste are Colgate. So Mrs. Jagan said, why change a name that is a household name that is known by everyone already? And so that's how we came up. Dr. Jagan came up with PPP Civic. We went to the elections in 1992, October, as PPP Civic. And at the end of the elections, if you walk the streets of this city, you will be surprised to see how things had changed. Everyone felt that a change had taken place in Guyana. That after 28 years of the PNC in government, and a number of more years of the PPP, in the what is called the political wilderness, the PPP and Cheddi Jagan was back in office. Thank you very much.
I know it's a very emotional thing for him, but she has been a great friend, a strong woman, and someone I'm happy to call Auntie Babs. So Auntie Babs, come forward, please.
I just want to say a few words, and I get very emotional when I speak about my brother. So I have written just a small thing to say to you. It is indeed a pleasure to be here today to speak about my brother, Dr. Cheddi Jagan. We, the family, are eternally grateful to him, and of course, my sister-in-law, Cheddi Jagan, for educating each one of us. In my life of 84 years, I have never seen anyone as he was. What he did for the family, he extended to the emerging Guyanese society, and later on incorporating a lot of those noble ideas in the new global human order. Coming from a poor family, he was very sympathetic to those who had the capacity for knowledge and kind to those without. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Babs. Lakshmi would have said to you, we went to visit the home of Cheddi, and we went to Babujan. But there was a particular reason why we went there. The Cheddi Jagan Research Center is in the process of writing a book, a biography of Comrade Janet. And the biographer wanted to see the place because she had a difficulty in how to end this book. So having gone to Port Morant, she said, I have now discovered what my last chapter will be. From the beginning, the humble beginning in Port Morant to Babujan. And they were shocked. They were foreigners, people from Ireland who came along. And when they saw the home, they couldn't believe that was the home in which they lived. And it has endeared them much more to Dr. Jagan and Mrs. Jagan. And importantly, when we talk about the fact that how he, in the Western trial, referred to the role of Comrade Janet in helping to educate his brothers and sisters. Think about put yourself in their shoe. This is a young couple, just got married, not probably more than a year or so, and you brought three or four of your siblings to this home to live. Tell me how much of us can do something like that. And that is what she and him had done to ensure all the brothers and sisters had an education. What a remarkable woman she is. And I would say a brother who wanted to take his siblings out of poverty, out of Port Morant, and to give them a good life. So thank you, Auntie Babs. And now it is my pleasure to invite Comrade Donald Ramatar, who has been the General Secretary of the party, President.
To the family of Comrade Cheddi who are here, Comrade Hari Prasad Nopta, probably one of the oldest members of the party that is still around. Comrades all, today is exactly 26 years since Comrade Cheddi went to sleep forever. Note I said sleep and not dead, because the life that he lived, people living that kind of life that he lived, persons never die. And there's always something that the works that he's left us. Because he touched on every important thing nationally and internationally. He had an opinion to give, and he expressed that opinion. And fortunately for us, he was a prolific writer, he was a fantastic communicator, and he was a great orator. He was such a good writer, a communicator, that I remember when I was a child, just merely a child, 12, 13 years old, living in Carrier. My father used to subscribe to the newspaper, the Mirror, but we didn't used to get it every day as you get it in Georgetown. We get it once a week or once every 2 weeks whenever a boat goes to Wakenham to collect the mails. And I remember used to be looking forward to read Comrade Cheddi's Straight Talk. Because even at that age, that tender age, I understood what he was writing about and the things that he was dealing with. As you must have concluded in your minds now, that this was a man of many qualities, many-sided man, that he is practically an inexhaustible subject. And therefore today I would like to concentrate on one aspect of his life. He was a true internationalist. He never saw the struggle in Guyana as only the concern of Guyanese. He saw the struggle of Guyana first in the colonial period as part of an international struggle. And he realized that what happened in one part of the world will have an impact, positive or a negative impact on us. And anti-colonial movements, national liberation movements, movements for social reform, socialism, whenever they made gains abroad, he saw it as a gain for the Guyanese people. And I chose this topic today because, as I said, many of you know of his writings internationally. And just coming to the end of his life, he was engaged in writing a new global human order, where he was trying to find a way, trying to find a new path for international relations because of the inequalities and injustices that existed within the world. And so profound was that work that it has been adopted at the United Nations as an official document of the United Nations. And today, while I speak to you and while I choose to speak about him as an internationalist, is because what is happening in the world right now. Never before have we been in such great dangers of the liquidation of mankind. Never before, even in the serious Cuban Missile Crisis, we have not been so close to a nuclear war as we have now. Because what is going on in Russia and Ukraine is put 4 nuclear powers facing each other. Russia, the United States, France, and the United Kingdom. All of these countries are armed with nuclear weapons. And any one of them that unleash one of these weapons, it will mean the end of life as we know it on earth. President John F. Kennedy probably said it the best. He said after the 1962 crisis in Cuba, when his generals were telling him to attack a preemptive strike on Russia, and he walked out of the meeting, he said, if there is such a war, those who die immediately will be the fortunate ones because of what it means. And I choose this today because I believe in our part of the world. We believe that what is happening in Ukraine and Russia does not concern us. But we are indeed all involved in this because we too will be wiped out. And therefore, I will say that we should have a say and we should express a view of what is taking place. And I thought, what would Cheddi have done in the first place? While Cheddi was an enormously popular man, and he alone had a following as great as the PPP following, and probably even more, he appreciated that. But more important for him, he wanted to have a conscious following. He wanted people to know and understand what they were fighting for. And that is why he paid such great attention to political education, so that people will understand. He worked on the premise that one great man once wrote that a slave who has become conscious of his slavery and begins to fight for his emancipation has half ceased to be a slave. That is how important he thought political education was. And there is a lot of distortion and lies that are taking place with what is happening with Russia and Ukraine. People say Russia went into Ukraine and they are saying that Russia should not have gone there, although Ukraine is on its borders and although Ukraine was moving to join NATO. But the same people says nothing when the Americans went to Vietnam 14,000 miles away and bombed the hell out of Vietnam and saying it was in their national interest. They said nothing when on the basis of a lie of national security, they went to Iraq and destroyed one of the oldest civilizations in the world. They said nothing when they have gone to Syria, another area that has most of humankind's history, destroyed that country and is there stealing the people's oil. But they are saying that Russia doesn't have a right to protect its own security that is happening there. And it is, we don't have the time today to go into the details, but the struggle that Russia was waging for a peaceful solution was gone back for more than 20 years, more about 30 years. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they withdrew all their troops from Eastern Europe on the basis of a promise made to them that NATO will not move 1 inch towards their border. Now they're on the people's border. Not 1 inch, they said, they will not have moved. And even then, Russia tried to help them. When Putin, the same man who they're demonizing today, came to power, and they were trying to get Ukraine into NATO, he proposed to them, he said, well, why don't you take Russia into NATO so we wouldn't have a problem? He was rejected. At the same time, they bombed the hell out of Yugoslavia again on American national security. Destroyed Yugoslavia. You hear them talking about Crimea, but what they did in Kosovo was worse than Crimea. And the fact that they rejected, not only rejected Putin's offer for Russia to join NATO, but also they removed themselves from the strategic limitation of strategic weapons, the SALT Treaty. Unilaterally removed themselves. Yet, Putin continued to try for peace. He made a proposal to them, because after the 2014, they had a change of government in Ukraine. He made a proposal to them, and the areas where Russians were living for centuries and centuries wanted to break away from the Ukraine and set up their own republics. He refused to take them in and made a proposal to them to say that they will give more autonomy to these areas, Donetsk and Luhansk. Recently, they signed an agreement where France and Germany were supposed to be guarantor of the agreement for more autonomy for those places. And now, former Chancellor of Germany, Merkel, has just come out with a statement to say that they were fooling the Russians all the time. They just wanted more time to put in more weapons into Ukraine to fight Russia. So they were planning to fight Russia at least, minimum at least 8 years before Russia went into Ukraine. And Hollande, the former French president who was president at the time, also admitted it is true. And Boris Johnson, not to be left out, he said it was a diplomatic charade, it was nothing, it was stupidness. Yet, they call Putin the aggressor. So, comrades, I just wanted to put that in view because what we're having in our media today is just raw-rank US propaganda. And many of the articles that I have written on this subject, they're not given the light of day in any of the press. And we, who fought for colonialism, against colonialism, for freedom, we are now beginning to limit our own freedom and sanction ourselves. And this is a dangerous situation that we're living in. Comrades and friends, I just thought I will let you know, because I believe that each one of us, individually and collectively, must make our voices heard to put an end to this. To hide behind frightening America and what they will do because they overthrow Jagan, they might overthrow again, is to encourage them to continue the war in the Ukraine. We cannot afford that because the stakes are much too high. And there's one other international issue that irks me, and I'm sure Dr. Jagan would have been doing a lot for it. I'm sorry I'm not doing as much as he would have done. Because I remember in the olden days, in 1960, when you had the Sharpeville massacre, he was the first leader in the Caribbean who came out against what was happening in South Africa. Even though we were still a colony, he was courageous enough to ban South African goods from coming into British Guyana. And when he came out and opposed a proposed cricket team going to South Africa led by Frank Worrell, he was criticized to say he doesn't know anything about cricket and he shouldn't mix cricket with politics. He set up in Guyana, and Rohi was part of it, and Gail Teixeira was part of it, leaders in it, an organization to concentrate and give solidarity to Southern Africa, organize activities to educate people of what was taking place. And today, a worse situation than ever existed in South Africa exists today in our presence. What is happening in Israel, Palestine? Any one of you who just look at the radio and the TV to see that what was happening in South Africa, in fact, one South African anti-apartheid fighter, a man by the name of Ronnie Castrells, visited Palestine, and he said South Africa was a paradise to what's happening in the Gaza and in the West Bank with the Palestinian people. Just to give you an idea, how would you feel if, because you are a Palestinian, just because you're a Palestinian, and you're living in a house that you inherited from your grandfather, that people one day walk out and kick you out to put in somebody who come from Ahuha, because he's a Jew, to put into their house? How would you feel? So when they talk about Palestinian terrorists, is it terrorism? They have no army. They have no tanks. They have no weapons. They're fighting with slingshots like David. It's a real David and Goliath situation once again. And these people are living in a prison. The Gaza is an open-air prison. They can't even fish on the ocean above them. And every day they're killed. And those who tell us about human rights are the ones that have armed Israel and created the powerful Israel military that they have. They have all of these things. All of these things they have been doing. They kill journalists, shoot them in open daylight, and say that there will be no investigation and no explanation and no apology given. Even Americans, a woman by the name of Rachel Corrie, stood up in front of a bulldozer when they were bulldozing a Palestinian woman's house. And the bulldozer ran over her and reversed back over her to ensure that she was dead. Not another word from those who claim to defend in American lives. So I want to just say these things to you at this time in the time that it is time that we do something about all the atrocities that exist in the world. Not only because of the suffering that is taking place in the world, but because it is part of our struggle. That, as I said at the beginning, Russia-Ukraine can mean the end of life on earth. And in Palestine, if Palestine is free, then the possibility of expanding the borders of freedom will be much greater. I thank you for your attention.
He would speak to them like a teacher, talking to them about the situation that had existed in the Caribbean and how they should work and collaborate so that they can help to educate the young progressive in the Caribbean. He had played that role. Additionally, he was very much involved in the work of the Peace Council, of which Comrade Rodi has resurrected. So just to add to those aspects of the international work. And now it is my honor and pleasure to invite our President, His Excellency Dr. Irfan Ali.
I just want to contextualize a few things before I go into what I want to say. Because I believe that for us to think for a moment that Dr. Cheddi Jagan's thoughts would have been static in today's environment would have been underestimating the brilliance of this man. In this whole conversation of what is happening internationally, we have to also be very practical. For us in Guyana, we believe, and this government, that is a PPP civic government, we believe in a few foundational, fundamental principles. One is democracy. We must support societies, governments, institutions that are democratic in nature. And in supporting institutions that are democratic in nature, we must support those who support us in ensuring democracy remains here. That's a fundamental point. Many times in our history, we speak, and the PPP Civic has been at the PPP has been at the receiving end of the stick because of its advocacy on many international fronts. But when we are faced with challenges at home, and Comrade Cheddi was very practical about this, when we are faced with challenges at home, many of the international partners are very, very quiet. You hear nothing from them. But they are partners who are allowed and who speak and who ensure that their voices add to the democratization and the securing of democracy in Guyana. And we must not lose sight of that also. We cannot lose sight of that because we live in a political environment. We are part of the Western Hemisphere. We have to understand the politics that exists within the Western Hemisphere. And I will go a bit to how Dr. Jagan navigated this whole Western Hemisphere and the whole ideological positioning of his thoughts and ideas throughout the history of his life. Because his thoughts and ideas evolved with time. And this is a very important point for us to note. The man was a thinking man. And his thoughts and ideas evolved. But what stood still was his principles, his morals, his beliefs, and his values. Those things stood still. But his ideas were shaped around the environment in which he had to succeed in. Fundamentally, we are a political party that must seek to succeed. And we don't want to succeed for a political party. We always, in the PPP Civic, want to succeed for Guyana. So we cannot be hypocrites. On one hand, we say we are arguing for the safeguarding of territorial integrity, and on the other hand, we're not saying the same thing when it comes to the threatening of other territorial integrity. Territorial integrity is an important tenet for civilization, whether it's with Palestine, where they are being bombarded, or in Ukraine, where their territorial integrity is threatened. We must always be on the side of principle. We must all, and that is all as a party, that is what we are taught. Always to be on the side of principle. Not to change our value system. We are not enemies with anyone. We are partners with everyone in pursuit of principles and objectives that uplift humanity and expand the prospect of better life for everyone. So I want to start by saying that. And that is the beauty about the PPP, you know. I have been blessed to be part of this party and to be in Central Committee at the time, even when Comrade Janet and so was there, and the type of debate and the depth of debate and depth of knowledge and analysis is something that any young person would cherish. Today I wrote on Facebook the following post. The ink of history will forever be fresh with his ideas. Now there's a very important statement in my mind, because I was just telling the comrades that if we don't write the history, then someone else would write it. And you can't then be angry when the history is written the wrong way. Because we have failed in our responsibility to present the history in the right way. So the ink of history will forever be fresh with his ideas. Talk is cheap. Development of ideas is not the putting together of words. An idea is something that is transformative. An idea that is something that separates ignorance from knowledge. An idea is something with value. An idea is something that uplifts. That is what an idea is. So the ink of history will forever be fresh with his ideas. Contributions and sacrifices for freedom, democracy, equality, unity, fairness, and the upliftment of all of humanity. These were the value system of the man. So the ideas that he taught were built around these values. They were built around freedom, democracy, equality, unity, fairness, and the upliftment of all of humanity. So his ideas captured these characteristics when he put them out there. So every idea that he pursued demonstrated these principles as the core values. That is an important point. I went on to say that he lived ahead of his time. Very important. Comrade Cheddi was not a reactionary force. He was a thinking force. So he was always ahead of his time. If you read the depth of some of what he wrote, you would see how far in advance of society and thinking at that point he was. So he lived ahead of his time. But importantly, in his death, his teachings remain constant with reality. So one may say, 26 years after, how realistic are the ideas of this man? How applicable are the ideas of this man? But his teachings remain constant with reality. His ideas remain constant. That is why his life is still applicable to the social, political, and economic transformation of Guyana and the region. His ideas are still applicable. His methods, to a large extent, are still very much applicable. But I will demonstrate, and I want you to, I don't normally prepare any text, you know me, but because I wanted to put very precisely a few points about Comrade Cheddi, I decided to take this route today, in addition to what I've just said. So yes, I'm very happy to be participating in this activity, in remembrance of one of the greatest political figures of the Western Hemisphere. And I want to emphasize that. This is not about Guyana. I want my words to be quoted directly. One of the greatest political figures of the Western Hemisphere, on the occasion of his 26th death anniversary. Had he been alive, he would have been just shy of 105 years today. His loss has indeed left a great void in our country and in the People's Progressive Party, CIVIC. But we are comforted that he has left us one of the finest examples of moral consistency, not only morals, moral consistency, integrity, and service to the poor. Cheddi Jagan was no ordinary man. He was a towering political giant, a man of profound principles. But above all, he was a man wholeheartedly and unapologetically committed to the working class. Now, for us to believe that the working class is at the exclusion of every other section of society would be doing a great injustice to this man. And because there's a period in history, Comrade Clement pointed to it, when they tried to use his alignment with the working class as a reason to discredit him from being the president of the country, because this was all they saw in him. But I'll continue. Comrade Cheddi had a special connection to the working people. So it was not only a case whereby he decided, I'm a working class champion. Because of his history, where he came from, the struggles, it developed a special connection to the working people. He was born into a working class family. His entire political career was spent in helping to ensure betterment for them. You know, Comrade Indra, for those of you who are born in a house that you grew up on cow milk, after a couple of years you stop drinking cow milk, you drink all the fancy milk. But as you get older, you come back and you say, man, I can't get some cow milk. The environment that you came up in, the challenges of that environment. When they come back, when your family and friends in UK and US, and you go there, they carry you to where Red Lobster, and they eating codberry and all fancy things. When they come back home here, what they ask for, pera, sugar cane. Because the environment has shaped you. So Comrade Cheddi had a special connection to the working people. He was born into that family. His entire political career was spent in helping to ensure betterment for them. He had a special connection with the poor. He had a connection with the poor from experiencing poverty, from understanding what poverty is, from understanding what all the brothers and sisters, married or unmarried, living in the same house with couple rooms, what that means. He came from that understanding in reality of what the ordinary citizens were going through. As Ian MacDonald once said, we know Ian MacDonald is a prolific writer. He said it very simply. Comrade Cheddi trusted them. He always trusted them. But more importantly, they believed in him. Why did he trust them? And why did they believe in him? Because he presented something that is called hope. He presented to the working class people the hopefulness of a better tomorrow. He presented them alternative that give them a boost in their morals, a boost in their confidence that their children and their lives will be better tomorrow. So that is one aspect. The party which he left us is a party of the working class. We can't get away from that. That is the foundational pillar of the party. And the PPP remains wedded to the working class. Don't worry about all this gap you're hearing, where some people who claim to be great writers, when we take care of the pensioners, put back the sugar workers to work, take care of the Amerindians, give the uniform grant, give the transportation grant, give free dialysis to all those who need dialysis treatment. That is the party he built to take care of the people. Now, the important point to note is that whilst the PPP remains wedded to the working class, in uplifting this class, some people adopt the myopic position that to be pro-working class means to oppose the business class. This is a nonsense. That they present this argument that to be pro-working class is to be opposed to the business class. We do not share this misguided proposition. This proposition is totally misguided. And it was deliberately developed and used to inflict political damage on the PPP. Because Comrade Cheddi understood the relationship between growth, development, and advancement of society. And I'll demonstrate that to you. Everything we do is to elevate the working class of Guyana. Make no mistake. That is the principle. If we are to have more to distribute to the poor, then we must enlarge the national pie. It is only natural. If you have to distribute more to the vulnerable, more to the poor, if you're to bridge inequality, bridge the gap, then you have to enlarge the national pie. It's just like home, in your house. You know, when we were growing up, we used to go by my grandmother, all the grandchildren in leg one. And every Sunday, they used to have sweet bake. Many of you urban children would not know what sweet bake is. And the bake was made at different size. And the grandchildren would sit by age from the top of the step to the bottom. So the youngest grandchild is at the bottom of the step. And that grandchild will start with a small triangle of sweet bake. And then the triangle gets bigger and bigger until you get to the top. The man at the top might end up with 2 bakes. Now, it's a similar thing like the pie. For you to give all of them the equal size of bake, the pie in the house got to increase. The revenue got to increase. Simple. If you want to uplift the educational standard of the society, and tomorrow I'm going to give some statistics that are going to blow this country apart. When we talk about women empowerment and what we have done for women, when you see the numbers, I guarantee you there is no other country in the Western Hemisphere that can touch some of the numbers we are doing. You will see it. I'm telling you about numbers that show enrollment rate at close to 70% of women in university and those who are exiting university at 90% when men are falling way back behind. Telling you about rate in Guyana, where directly owned housing, where women-led application is about 46%, and joint men and women is about 20%. So women-led home ownership is 75%. Where else that happened? But we are not telling the story. And we're allowing people to wiggle their wormy way through narratives that are totally false. So, this pie must increase. If we are to have more to distribute to the poor, then we have to have a bigger national pie. This is why we are committed to growing the economy and to ensuring that this growth is across sectors and is even-handed. Now, the comrades here, coming down, all those who were in the cabinet after 2006 will tell you that, even when you were there coming into it, that when we realize that we need to convey this message of how we are growing the national pie, supporting the private sector to grow that national pie and expand that national pie, the new concept, what are we doing it as? That is why the PPP went ahead and said, and to this day, we are pursuing a pro-poor approach to growth and development. A pro-poor approach to growth and development. Growth for us is not an end in itself. I want you to listen carefully, youngsters especially. Growth for us is not an end in itself. It is the means to an end. The means to ensure greater benefits for the people. The means to keep sectors and industries alive, and thus ensure employment for more working men and women. Growth provides more resources for development, human and social development, which are both important for uplifting the working class. It comes back to the working class. We have more revenue. What does the PPP do with it? We are building community roads, building new farm-to-market access roads to increase lands to give to who? The farmers, the poor, new home ownership. Creating new housing area to give to who? This is what we use the revenue for. You don't see us ballooning the current expenditure. The current expenditure is the expenditure in the budget that, a lot of you enjoy life with. If you look at the percentage of increase in the capital expenditure versus the ratio of increase in the current expenditure, you would see that the government is running a tight belt with the expenditure focused on the transformation of communities and people. Because that is what is key for the growth and development of our country. And this is what living Comrade Cheddi legacy is. It's not reading and being static. If we are to live his legacy, then we have to ensure that we continuously manage in a way in which his legacy reflects the government policy. For Comrade Cheddi, growth is linked to development. Growth must be directed towards social benefits. He urged growth, but growth which must be accompanied by development. There are many countries that grow, but you don't see development. I give a very simple example. When we left government in 2015, and notice how the PPP is. We understand the environment. When we left government in 2015, you would never hear somebody from APNU saying they left government in 2020. We left the uniform grant there without oil resources. Without a cent of oil resources. We left the jobs in the sugar sector. They came in with oil found, buoyancy in the economy and confidence, and took away that. Took away the jobs. Took away the CSO jobs. What it tells you? It is not a function of money and growth. It is a function of philosophy. It's a function of the system that is inherently part of them. And this is what we must understand. That philosophically, we are different. That is why you will see the structure of budgets different. You will see the nature of our expenditure different. Because our policy making mechanism itself is different. We don't worry first about the brand of clothes you wear. We worry first about whether you have clothes to wear. Philosophy is the reverse. Not about the clothes, but the brand. To put it in simple terms. When we invest in infrastructure, we are promoting pro-growth policies. The investments in infrastructure help create conditions for improving competitiveness. And who benefits competitiveness? Come road. The businesses. If we improve the road on which a small business is, the cost of doing business go down. So the link is there. But for that competitiveness to come, we have to invest in infrastructure. We have to create infrastructure that will allow growth to follow. Very, very important for us to understand. So the investment in infrastructure help to create conditions for improving competitiveness, without which the economy will contract. Understand this. If we don't build the 4-lane highways and improve, every time you sit down in the traffic, for those of you who come from Region 3, let us say you have 1,000 vehicles, you have far more than this, I'm just giving an example, coming in the traffic. And because of the slothfulness of the infrastructure, each vehicle is spending an additional 2 hours in the traffic. And you have 4 persons in the vehicle. That is 8 hours in every vehicle. And 1,000 vehicles, that's 8,000 productive hours you lose sitting in the traffic. You know what that does for production? Imagine you're running a business and you lose 8,000 hours of productive time. That is why this investment is so critical and so integrated into growth, competitiveness, but importantly, in ensuring that jobs are secured. So when we go to build this new bridge, the 4-lane, and let me tell you what is vision. You had a government that was going to build a 2-lane bridge. And guess where you're taking the bridge? Across Houston. So Shore Base would have been shut down by now. Since we came into government, we've approved more than $30 billion of investment along the shore, all of which was held up for over 3 years with the last government. Unlocking jobs. But that simple decision, it sounds very simple to the folks. But what that did was to allow the entire west bank of the river now to become as viable and valuable as the east bank of the river. That is why we're seeing now a massive offshore island being built. You think Comrade Cheddi would have been opposed to that? You think Comrade Cheddi would have been opposed? But let me tell you, Comrade Janet was the first who said let us have the exploration for oil resources out there. You think they were opposed to it? They understood that It was needed for the transformation of the country. Now, I'm going on too long now, coming into. Infrastructure helps to improve the quality of service provided to the people. It allows producers to get their produce to market quicker and easier. It helps to enhance communities and make life easier for citizens. Now let me explain this. In the early PPP government, when they go to a farming community, they were met with a priority of the farmers. And the priority of the farmers was to help them to build a boat to bring out the produce. And I'm not talking to you about region 1 or 2. I'll tell you right at Ruby back down. The priority was to buy a rope to put on a boat to pull it out. Come, Rohi. You know this. As time evolved under the PP government and you go back, the priority is we want an engine on the boat. Because that is what development did. After that, the priority was that we want a more dam. Because now they're uplifting themselves, they got tractor. After the mud dam, the priority is that we want a crusher run, all-weather surface. You get that? That's done. Then the priority is, wait a second, current doctor, you know this well, you went through this. Even in the hinterland, this is how the priority is changing. We want electricity. We want now our children. We don't want our children to go through what we went through. We want them to get education. We need a school. We need electricity. We need primary, secondary, nursery school. Now when you go, they say we want asphaltic concrete road coming out from the farmland. But we created that environment because we allowed people to think bigger. We have continuously improved the life of people to the extent that they dream larger. And that is the legacy of the PPP. We have created a country in which we have built a system to allow people to think bigger, larger, through our transformative agenda. And that, if you go through the records, you will see every single, when our General Secretary, Comrade Jagdev, spoke about everything we had to fight for, that is what he's talking about. The Marriott, the stadium, you remember? Every single transformative project we had to fight for. We're building a road that will increase the value of the properties in Maka by 400-500%. We offered them houses that had values versus squatter houses, and we had to fight still to build the road. It didn't come easy, and it will not come easy until we change not the mindset. The mindset is there. We have to change what they perceive to be their philosophical hold on the people. And that requires young people like you. The new messaging. We will beat racism out of the ground of Guyana. This PPP civic government. And you know why we will beat it? Because fundamentally, our value system does not teach us it in the PPP. It is not part of our principle in the PPP. We don't use it as a mobilization tool. We don't use it opportunistically. Any leader in the PPP who try to use that opportunistically, they won't see the light of being a leader for too long. That is why we will win. It may take longer than we want it to take. But the population is coming along. Look at local government election. A confident political party would want to go to election. But you have a political opposition that should be interested in testing the ground, that is finding every excuse not to have election. Now, I want to come back to this very important point, because I see many writers still making this mistake. Comrade Cheddi was not anti-investment. He wanted investment that would not lead to a net drain of resources out of the country. But he was never opposed to foreign investment. I've examined all his readings, his writings, and I can't find a single chapter that was opposed to foreign investment. But he spoke heavily about the moral responsibility of investment, foreign investment. He believed that investment must have a moral responsibility. Now, why I told you the man was ahead of his time, and his writing is still constant today, because the modern world say you must have corporate social responsibility. Is that socialist, communist, capitalist? The modern world is saying now that part that you must have is by compulsion. It's by compulsion that you have corporate social responsibility. And then there is a second term, Comrade Haidar, that is now called in modern theory as the moral hazards. The moral hazards. These are concepts rebranded and repositioned, but concepts that Comrade Cheddi spoke of that were misinterpreted to be anti-investment. But he was spoken, when he spoke then, he was speaking specifically about the moral hazards and about corporate social responsibility. That is why the freshness of the idea and this event is so important, so that the generations generation, you're 26, how old are you now? 20. So this allows you to understand the practicality of the man, how relevant the thinking of the man is to you up to today, and will outlive all of us. Comrade Cheddi was a consummate working class champion. It was he who set the party on its ingrained policy of championing the interests of the working class. Comrade Cheddi was a prophet of the working class. In 1992, he said this about his government: "This government is rooted in the working class. And if I am to remain head of my government, you can be certain that the working class would always have a say in determining the policy of the government." Why is this relevant today? Today you will see a cabinet that is in every single community, like previous cabinets. Cabinet outreaches, public outreaches, listening to the people, allowing the voices, and now we're doing it a bit better with technology. We are not filtering anything. We go live. The entire country can listen to what everybody is saying, whether it's nice, ugly, bad, whatever it is. That is true democracy. That is what he meant in 1992. That the government will be one that incorporates the ideas, the priorities of the working people that continues today. So today I echo those sentiments and say that without fear of contradiction, now or in the future, that whichever government I head will never abandon the working class. The upliftment of all the people of Guyana. The upliftment of all the people of Guyana is the ultimate aim of this government. But I say again, being pro-working class does not make one anti-business. Today we are standing on the shoulders of the illustrious son of our soil. We are protecting his legacy and continuing his lifelong commitment to the working class. Now, Comrade Clement made this point. Protecting his legacy is not singing a hymn or singing a song, "Holy Comrade Cheddi, we love you, Comrade Cheddi, we love you." protecting his legacy is ensuring that when we're in government, we pursue an agenda that continues to support the holistic upliftment of Guyanese and Guyanese. Our record speaks for itself. Since we returned to office in 2020, we've increased workers' wages. We've revived the sugar industry. We have reversed the tragic situation in which some 7,000 workers were on the breadline. We have expanded the economy and created thousands of jobs for workers. We have launched a temporary job program which will end up providing employment for more than 10,000 persons. We're improving social services. Old age pension have increased to 33,000. Parents are now benefiting substantially from the Because We Care grant. This is easing the financial burdens of outfitting their children for school. The school feeding program is being expanded countrywide. During the height of the pandemic, we distributed a 25,000 cash grant to every household. Our riverine and hinterland communities have benefited from additional cash grants. We have offered relief and assistance to those affected by floods or fisher folk. Our housing program is providing opportunities for thousands of working class families in their home. How then can anyone claim that we are a government that is not working class? We are a government that stands firmly on the legacy of Comrade Cheddi Jagan. We are a government that lives the legacy. We are a government that celebrates the legacy with our policies and our position for the upliftment of people. Look at his nephews and their children living his legacy too. You know, every time I go to Clive Jagan place there, I'm very proud. Because you see generational aspiration. You see generational transformation, and these young boys now don't want to just put a dental chair. They now have the clothes on that their parents worked hard for. They're now ensuring the clothes is the right brand for the market. And that is progression. There is nothing wrong with that. That is the evolution of things. They have to respond to market needs. They have to safeguard their employees. This commitment that I just mentioned did not come easy. We had to face the Herculean challenges since we assumed office in August 2020. First, the challenge to get in office after winning the election. Every government and every leader faces challenges, domestic, regional, and international. Comrade Cheddi was no exception. When he was elected as president in 1992, the country was bankrupt. The economy was in ruins. Its external debt was more than $2 billion. Guyana was classified as a highly indebted poor country. Debt servicing gobbled up most of the country's revenue, leaving very little for development. A new global political dispensation had emerged with the end of the Cold War. And the issue of ideology was put on the back burner by many societies. Very important to note. I know Comrade Haidar might challenge this, but it is the truth. The issue of ideology was put on the back burner. On the front burner was the development of the people and the aspirations of the people in every country. And Comrade Cheddi, coming to government, met that. You know, when you're in government, the demands are a lot. And when he came, the country was in a structural adjustment program. He came and met that. This is a fact, this is a history. How did he deal with it? But even though he was a socialist, let us say even though he was a socialist, he did not reject the need for adjustment. Now I want you to hear this. He came and he met the structural adjustment program. He did not reject the need for adjustment. Instead, he sought to tailor this adjustment to rebuild the economy, to better serve the people, and to lay the foundation for future transformation. So he took something he met. He didn't throw out everything. He met this. He understood that in the environment he had to work with this. But what he did was to adjust one component of the structural adjustment. What the adjustment must focus on. What the priorities of the adjustment must be. And within the rules and the framework, he tailored the structural adjustment program to what the priorities were. And in a very famous address to a gathering in Toronto, you know, sometimes when you go to the diaspora, they have a lot of answers and questions. And he had a very buoyant group in Toronto with a lot of questions. And he said this in October 1996, and I quote, "We have to work with the system, but we must tread carefully between conformism and transformation." You hear that? This is a man that is thinking. He didn't say we're going to walk away from the system, but he recognized there is two sides here. You got to be careful not to be a conformist, and you got to, on the other side, you got to walk this balance to ensure that you have transformation. But you have to do so within the governing framework. That is what the answer was. He had made an assessment of the objective conditions of the time and the appropriate response given to what he inherited. The new international political order that was emerging and a need for transformation locally. Comrade Cheddi was practical and pragmatic. Now let me relate that to present day. There's a lot of empty noise about the Exxon contract. We said that we got a raw deal. It's a given. But we came and met it. We came to government and we met that. If we throw out and walk away from it, what happens? Everything out there stops. And Exxon, the size of Exxon economy as a company, many times bigger than us. The lawyers would have had a field day. And guess what? All those persons who borrowed money from the banking system to build apartments, to build services because of oil and gas, everything would have shut down. Who would have prepared the bank? The banking system would have gotten a run, and we would have been in. I can't use the word I want to use. That's a better word. I was using one stronger than that, but I'll take yours. This is the reality. You reached an objective condition you have to know. So what did this government say? We reached this, but we're not conformists. We are now going to extract maximum benefit from what is there. Through administrative mechanism, through the environmental mechanism, extract maximum benefit. And that is what we've been doing. Exactly. Exactly. And we don't have 3-4 messages, you know. Before the elections, our message was clear on this. Some of these jokers who were part of the signing of the contract, now on front page, there's celebrities on some of the newspaper front page. We will renegotiate. Renegotiate what? Your fork mouth? Pack of jokers. Now, we had made an assessment of the objective condition of the time and the appropriate response given in what we inherited. The new international political order that was emerging and the need for transformation locally. Now, when Comrade Cheddi was in government, when he was out of government, there was a certain political order. By the time he got in government, the political order had changed. Y'all don't forget the political order in 2015. Now let's go to 2011, right, Clement? Yes. The political order that existed, that influenced the local political environment in 2011. That political order strengthened itself in 2015. So we got to be naive if we don't understand we are operating in an international political order that requires us to be nimble. Not to lose value, not to move away from principle, not to move away from the values, but to be nimble whilst we safeguard those principles and values. We are not a reactionary force, right, Siraj? We are not a reactionary force. Siraj at the back there, man. He's chewing on some rice. So Comrade Cheddi was practical and pragmatic, not inflexible and dogmatic. Very important. The Comrade Rohi made this point. That was part of his strength, actually. His ability. I have listened to many comrades speak about him listening for hours and then coming back the next day with his thoughts. Because he was not inflexible to thinking. He explained that to blindly conform to the IMF medicine, which included privatization, devaluation, wage freeze, was to go down a road towards sure death. However, he recognized that the dire need of the country's economy presented challenges to transformation. And this is why he urged greater national cohesion and the creation of a national democratic state. Because without these, the country's path to change would have been seriously retarded. This is important. We saw what took place when democracy was challenged and threatened. The man is living. His thinking and ideas is alive. I'm proving it to you. Today, whilst we can say we're not in an IMF structural adjustment program, many countries in the region are now entering that program. And they now have to do what Comrade Cheddi did since 92. Navigate, find the balance, and they're cutting the tail to find it. I can tell you that. Because the objective position has changed. You have a situation now where Guyana has to, Comrade Rohi was telling me, I didn't even realize, that Guyana is featured on Al Jazeera front page now. We have a different environment. You see this oil and gas thing, it brings revenue, but it brings attraction. We are on a different level of scrutiny. We are playing ball in a bigger play field. More aggressive bowlers. Once I said that with the sophisticated investor will come the sophisticated criminals. We have to build a system now to react. We have the ability to deal. We have to have the ability to deal with a sophisticated investor and at the same time a sophisticated criminal. Things have changed dramatically for us. That requires a different mode of operation and thinking. And if Comrade Cheddi was alive today, I would not believe that he would walk away from his principles. But I will also not believe that he would have, in a sweeping way, castigate or set aside the Partners for Democracy. He would never have done that. Because he said it here, my friends. This is not what I said. He said it here. And this is why he urged. Everything he said, I'm summing up now his whole life work. He said everything I'm telling you all about here is like the book of Revelations for those who are Christians. Jesus Christ said everything I teach you all here, if you don't do it, fathers, this is the consequence here. Comrade Cheddi said he was no God, but he was a human who was thinking. He said, listen to me, if we achieve everything, but we don't move to greater national cohesion and the creation of a national democratic state, all of it gone to naught. Now, the next series that we will discuss, I hope, is what constitutes a national democratic state. And what are the responsibilities of a citizen in a national democratic state. Because that is not a political responsibility, a political party responsibility. The building of a national democratic state is one in which the citizens are part owner. You're a shareholder in the state, bro. So, in pursuing this path, we have been inspired by the vision of Dr. Jagan. We remain committed to the working people, to the removal of poverty, and to ensuring that our country grows and that working class welfare is enhanced. Comrade Cheddi's legacy remains intact. Let me repeat that. Comrade Cheddi's legacy remains intact. I want you to repeat that. I want you to repeat that. Comrade Cheddi's legacy remains intact. He was a visionary leader that left us a strong party. Our party is firmly anchored within the working class of Guyana and the people of Guyana. We will safeguard and promote his legacy, and in so doing, take Guyana to where he would have liked it, a prosperous and unified country where there is development with a human face. I thank you, and God.
Comrade Irfan, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. And we hope that you will grace us many more times as we delve into the personality of Comrade Cheddi. And I agree with you, he lives. That's a simple word, he lives. And his vision and his thoughts and his ideals and everything that he stood for will continue to live for all of us. So on behalf, again, of the Research Center, I want to extend holy greetings to everyone. I do hope that you will enjoy the day. And thankfully that we have seen that Holi is embraced by almost all Guyanese. And it's a wonderful way, as we work to have the One Guyana vision, it's the way to bring our people together. And secondly, a happy International Women's Day to all our women. And as we talk about the advancement of women in all areas, we have to be mindful about our child, where they are going. We have to work with them so that together we can elevate both. As we talk about gender equality, we don't only speak about women, but we also speak about our men. So once again, thank you very much. Have a blessed balance of the day.